Welcome to episode 1 of the Artificiality podcast.
Hi.
I'm Dave.
I'm Helen.
And we're here to talk about Helen's latest publication, The Paradox of Personalization. Seems to be a perfect issue of the newsletter to start a podcast off of. For those of you who are first listening in, the idea with this podcast is we get to go deeper on the topics in the newsletter as a conversation between the two of us, and including some questions from people who listen and send them in ahead of time. So if you'd like to join in the conversation, send us in a question next time. So this episode is near and dear to my heart. I like the topic, the paradox of personalization. Why don't you just start off by describing what that paradox is?
Well, essentially the paradox of personalization is that the AI is trying to predict our behavior, and that the more it's able to predict our behavior, the more it's able to personalize a recommendation or personalize something for us. But at the heart of that, it also means that we become more predictable, and that isn't something that is necessarily kind of human. Like it's part of what makes us human is, and where we're supreme over an AI, if you like, is that we can handle unpredictability, and we thrive with unpredictability. That's what we've evolved to do, is to see things in the world and make sense of the world and look for novelty and look for things we don't understand. So as AI predicts our behavior more and more, it actually limits our ability to deal with unpredictability. So this paradox is not an easy one to resolve.
So keep going on that. How does the AI actually? How does the AI get to interfere with our agency by making predictions?
Well, it comes down to sort of how it makes those predictions. So, and this is where it's one of those important things to understand is how different AI is, because you can go for the longest time. There's been things that have manipulated and influenced our choices, but the difference with AI is that it changes and it learns on its own. So it is role creating, and because the type of information and that it acts off of works beyond our level of beyond our conscious awareness, that this whole situation sort of is materially different. So we've got this thing that is changing and evolving around us, and can think in ways that is quite foreign to us, and is able to perceive and act and predict. And those predictions that are put in front of us are things that it knows about us that we don't necessarily know ourselves. So we're guided down this narrower and narrower path into a more predictable person. And a more predictable person actually isn't a person. It's a machine. And this is where, doing these thought experiments about a reverse Turing test is really interesting, because we've I imagine that everyone listening to this podcast has heard of the Turing test, where the human interviews a machine or a human and has to pick which they're interviewing. And passing the Turing test by a machine means that it's fooled a human, that it's a human, not a machine. But if you think about it the other way around, what you actually end up doing is at what point does the machine think it's talking to a human, but it's actually talking to a machine? So the paradox in some ways is making machines more human and humans more machine. So
you talk in here about you write in here about this, saying AI can also influence our behavior at a subconscious level because our preferences are often formed by associative learning without us being consciously aware. Describe, what do you mean by that they're formed by associative learning?
So we learn things without really necessarily knowing that we're learning, right? So this is part of, I think it was the original term with us around Polanyi's paradox, where we don't know what we don't know. We don't know how we've learned things. And those associations that we form, you look at small children, look at toddlers and babies learning, they learn this thing we call common sense by association. So they need to look at a dog once to know it's a dog, but they can then still know it's a dog when they see it from behind. or from the side or in low light or in silhouette, whereas a machine can't do that. A machine learns in a different kind of way. And so we learn, as much as we learn that a dog is a dog from every direction, we learn other concepts and other ideas from other associations that we're not necessarily consciously aware of. And machines can put some of those things in front of us because machines look for patterns and associations in ways that we have no concept of. We have no concept of mouse clicks and eye tracking being something that indicates something about our doubts or our hesitations. We have no concept of those things indicating that we're sick. We have very little conscious awareness even of how we learn about others' social cues. People love to pick apart mimicry and body language. We still don't really even know how much of that we learn from.
And so you're saying that the machine can actually find those associations even though we don't know the associations are there ourselves.
Yeah. Particularly in things that operate, that machines can track that we can't track. So, take examples of some of these recruitment systems, pre-recruitment systems, where the AI is either getting you to play a game or getting you to interview on your computer video camera. And it in a half-hour video, it has 100,000 data points. I have no. What are those data points? Is it the way the multiple muscles in your face move? Is it the tonality of your voice? Is it where your eyes look? Is it whether you look to the left or look to the right? Is it the mouse tracking? The answer is it's probably all of those, but we don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm glad that you referenced the book User Friendly, which we've been enjoying on audiobook as we drive around. And the fact that they talk in there about the most valuable raw material in product design is now human behavior, which is such a fascinating thing because you usually think about designing products for humans to use and something that solves their wants and needs. But it's it's an interesting twist to come back around and realize that the input into the design is actually the behavior, which is sort of the output of the human.
Well, and I think that, you can look across pretty much every AI situation that you come into, there'll be some sort of paradoxical thing. And I don't think that that's an accident. I think that we're going to find and reveal over time more and more of these paradoxes. They're going to run deeper and deeper. I think it's an inherent part of AI, and in actual fact it was one of the things that attracted me in the first place, because what's happening is that on one end of the spectrum people are designing AIs to be like humans, and on the other end of the spectrum people are designing AIs to be not like humans, like as far from human thinking as we can imagine. And that process is very revealing. It reveals to us what being human even is. And so whether it's a direct reflection in a mirror or whether it's some sort of crazy house of mirrors distorted view, we're getting this ongoing revealing of the features that make up being human. And sometimes we find that quite contradictory, and that's what a paradox is, and they're kind of everywhere. And this one in personalization is the paradox of we want to have prediction, we want to have that personalization that's just about us, but on the other hand that erodes our ability to find who we are, because who we are relies on our discovery of unpredictable things and our reflection on how we respond to unpredictable things. And so you can look at personalization and the paradox of personalization as a very deep one to resolve, because, and if you're an AI designer, it is a deep one to resolve, but it's not unresolvable and can be used as a design tool.
Yeah, I love first of all, I love your comment that there's so many paradoxes, because it does feel like every time we're reading another article, reading another book, there's yet another paradox that keeps coming up. and somebody's got some new idea. But in this case, what I do like the extension of taking the predictability and trying to solve a prediction for a human's next action. And in order to make that prediction most accurate, you have to make the human fit the prediction, right? It's either the machine is so good at predicting, the next thing that we're going to do that it's perfect a prediction, and so therefore it can personalize any outcome because it can predict what we're going to do. But then it goes the other way and it keeps going a little bit further. And as you talk about it here with using the Zuboff's term of human futures, is thinking about how a machine can influence us because it understands things about us that we don't understand ourselves, to actually follow through on whatever was predicted, what our predicted behavior will be. And that's an interesting, transition to go from having personalization be about predicting what we might do to personalization being influencing us to go do the thing that the machine would like us to do.
And on one level, that feels like a contradiction, right? And one level that you flip into this mindset of, well, that's good or that's bad or it's contradictory. But I think that, it's not really, because there could be a latent or a hidden preference that's tweaked and then becomes expressed. And so what feels like a contradiction might not actually be a contradiction. It might be just that you need to dig deeper. And this is where I think it's a really interesting process for anyone who's interested in AI, but also for AI designers to sort of keep peeling back this kind of onion of what's actually happening at this moment. So, there could be a lot of other explanations that are quite consistent with what we already know. The preference could be something that we deny, but in fact we know, and all it takes is a nudge to express that and to act on it. It could be something that we're trying to resist. There's plenty of those things. It could be a preference of what we desire in our future self, but not in our present self. And we have those images of a future self that we will probably never get to, but we'll happily use an AI to help us get to those points if we can kind of encode it.
But then you have to I'm going to stop you there, because you have to think that, but whether, if an AI knows something about us that we don't know and can predict what we want to be in the future and what we want our future self to be, you get stuck in this loop of wondering whether that is really what you'd want to be or what you would become if the AI hadn't influenced
Well,
it.
of course, it also could be something that the AI has determined that everyone should be. I mean, that's kind of what China is.
And this is part of
in terms of this. That there's that's so conformist that it's been put into that mode in a more authoritarian, compulsory manner.
And this isn't a unique experience with AI. I'm a different person now, having been married to you for 10 years, right? The influence of the people around us changes who our future selves are anyway.
That's a super important part of this. Let me go back to. I want to come back to that because I think that's another way to look at some of the things that AI is doing to our society right now.
Sure.
But going back to these preferences, I think that you go back to something that the real art of personalization is that it just hits perfectly when someone wants that unpredictability or that novelty. And that is a fine line to tread between giving them more agency or giving them less agency in that moment. And, in some ways it's great that AI is not perfectly predictable itself, because you do want a degree of randomness at that moment. But because we have evolved so, to discover these new things about the world, in many ways what we see with this paradox is more a continuation of the centuries of thought that the philosophers have put into free will. Because AI has been so successful at throwing this idea firmly into the spotlight because of how it measures and tracks and predicts human behavior that's outside of our conscious awareness. So I often ask this question, is personalization just our unconscious mind perceiving information from an AI that our conscious mind can't detect? And that's where you can kind of start to kind of unpick this even further. At that point, it's you need to go have a drink.
Exactly, because you can't. If it is reflecting the unconscious mind, there's no way to know that. There's no way to actually understand whether an AI is actually reflecting that, or if that's just a label we're putting on the AI actions, or a hope, or an aspiration that we're putting on an AI
quite
action.
true. And I think that what you have to be aware of, because the way that we counteract that as individuals is to toggle between system 1 and system 2. So the Daniel Kahneman's system 1, intuitive, sort of, on the fly thinking, system 2, analytical, slower, more cognitively taxing. We should be thinking about how we go backwards and forwards between those two worlds. So at what point is that prediction just like it's not degrading my ability to make a decision. It's a good decision, even if it's an intuitive decision, versus at what point is it degrading my ability to make a decision because it's flipping me into the wrong mode of thinking.
So after a recent presentation, when we talked through the paradox of personalization, somebody came up to us and asked the question, isn't this just the same as old school advertising? Right? So isn't this the same as Marlboro tapping onto some subconscious desire to be a frontiersman, and so therefore the big Marlboro man that looks nice and tough is, pulls on something and subconsciously, and so if you smoke a cigarette, you're going to be that person. You say in here, AI is different because it's role creating. It learns from data. It creates its own knowledge that humans struggle to understand. It interferes with our agency. I think it's really interesting, this concept of AI being role creating.
Yeah, well, it is, and it's role creating because it learns on its own, but it's role creating because a designer, someone, instantiates it with values, and there is just flat out no such thing as completely neutral. There is some value set that's put into that the way that the AI works, so that even after its design, it's released, if you like, even though that's sort of a fungible concept nowadays, its behavior relies on those values and how it experiences the world post-design. And its values affect what it does with that data, how it perceives that data, and how it interacts with humans. And so it is unique. It's not the same as traditional technology where you can sit down and look at the code and understand how it's making decisions. An AI, by its nature, creates a role, which then, of course, creates another role in the human.
And how is that? Is it the same or different than humans making roles for each other? So you walk in a room and we're with each other, we have a role of spouse with each other. When there's one of our kids here, we have a role of parent. And so somebody comes in and creates a new role. We got a new friend, it's a different kind of role. Is that kind of what you're getting at, that the AI plays a role with us like it's a human, or am I thinking about it the wrong way?
Well, it could be. I mean, it depends sort of on its intent and its context. See, one of the things that makes it different is that it can have an intent, but then that can disassociate from the consequences. And that depends on the context, and that depends on the values that it's instantiated with, and that it depends on the data that it encounters in the wild activities. So as a human, you're giving it different kinds of data, and you could say that AI that's designed to be human-like is much more a human kind of role. But I don't actually think that necessarily holds, because an AI that can be really, really foreign is actually also fulfilling some kinds of human-like roles. Like an AI that's super foreign to us in terms of tracking, say, mouse movements and eye tracks, its values could be designed to offset a human bias or to give the objective truth. That's a different set of values than personalizing something that is familiar to you or known to you and is always going to provide you something that's specifically designed for you, as opposed to not designed specifically for your like individual preference, but designed much more to counteract a known human bias, like like confirmation bias, for example.
Yeah, there's something interesting in there that, I mean, because obviously everything that we come in contact with, whether it's a pet or an object, can play a role for us in our lives. What's interesting is when you put this into the context of the AI is unique it is, I think it is unique in that it has an objective that it's been given, and in the context of personalization, your idea is the objective is to predict a future that is personalized to an individual person, and that does create a really different role. I mean, it is a different role, and its objective can also create a new role for each of us individually as it solves for that objective. And depending on how it's designed, that can either be something that is complementary and encouraging of our future, or it can be in conflict and trying to create our new future.
Yeah, and the type of algorithm, the type of AI will influence that as well.
Sure.
I mean, like reinforcement learning that is becoming increasingly valuable and popular to use. It in and of itself, it alters the environment because it's making decisions based on causing something, changing something ahead of it, and that in itself creates a role. The AI particularly has a role. I mean, a self-driving car has a role on the road that people have to respond to.
So you talked a little bit later on in the piece about AI's efficiency versus personal agency and the conflict that creates.
Well, AI is, I mean, you look at across pretty much every use case. I mean, AI is there as an optimizing, efficiency promoting technology, and to take the fat out of economic systems to more finely grained solutions for, deliveries or healthcare or whatever. And because it's oriented to efficiency, then, I mean, that is basically why we deploy it. We're trying to be more efficient. We're trying to get more with less. We're trying to be more productive in the workplace or whatever it is. But our societies aren't actually, that's not what they're trying to do. There's a ton of scholarship on this and some really interesting reading that people can do to follow up, where our societies work best when they're not efficient, when the future value of leaving things open is much, much, much greater than the present value of being really super efficient. So we end up with this genuine contradiction that we never want to close. We always want to be like intention there. We always want to be solving for, the taxi service, the Ubers to be more efficient, but we don't want to solve for society to be so efficient that the only thing we ever need is an Uber.
Because that future, that's closing down the future options is what is actually is counteracting the efficiency gains of today.
And just the fact that, there's a really micro argument around this that you and I have had a lot with people who say that all the jobs are going to go away with AI. And the reason that we know that's not going to happen is because we haven't solved all of the problems. And there is no way for AI to solve all of the problems for us, because AI solves for efficiency and solves for, there are some AI that is about discovery, sure, but mostly it's solving to do more of the same with less input. And what we as humans want to do is solve new problems and deal with unpredictability and find and work together to do that. And it's that working together. If there was no need, if we were all completely predictable and the world was completely predictable, we wouldn't need to work together. Then we wouldn't find any reason to connect.
We could all just be sitting looking at our phones,
Yeah.
walking down the street,
That's right.
because there's no need to actually interact with each other, which brings you the closing that you have, which is fantastic, which is talking about how Like you say, perhaps the ultimate protection we can give our kids is the right to figure themselves out before an AI does it for them.
Absolutely. Go back to what I said at the start of this about it being a mirror.
Yeah.
And the problem with too much digital interaction, too much AI in front of children, is they just get stuck looking at their 13-year-old selves in a mirror. Mm-hmm. And their 13-year-old selves is a mess. It's a total mess. And that's the last thing that you want them to do, is to get stuck in that age, because it's not just one person, it's a multitude of identities that they're putting out there and experimenting. Remember what it was like to be that age. You got 1 million friends, and you know that you're going to trim those over time, but you're presenting these different identities to people, and the last thing we want is for AI to pick one of them and set them on a track that their preferences are sort of, and their identity, their sense of what they can and they can't do and what they're good and they're good at, gets cemented with this digital experience way too early.
Yeah, I'm actually quite glad that I don't remember very much about being 13. I remember not really liking 13, and I remember very vividly, completely reinventing myself in high school, which was by choice and by reflection of the people around me and having different outcomes. And I don't think there would have been no data coming out of my middle school years that would have predicted, where an AI could have predicted what my future self would have been. There's absolutely no.
Yeah, but imagine if it
there.
had, and you would
that would have
middle school years.
Exactly. If it could either kept me going on that path, or if it had predicted the changes, then it would be really entirely too creepy. And who knows how that would happen. Is again back to this sort of paradox of having the paradoxes that come out as we learn more about us as humans than we did before, because we're creating intelligences to interact with. And it's a very complicated process to try and design those things.
It is. And I think that, for people working in this every day, there's this constant need to step back and to go in and out between what's the intent, what's the context, what's the consequence, and keep going around that loop.
This is awesome. I think this is great first episode of the Artificiality podcast. Looking forward to doing this again. For those of you who are listening, we plan to record a podcast a few days following each newsletter to have a deeper conversation, and hope you enjoy it. Take care of each other. It's better than solid state.